So is your memory reliable? Well, by and large, yes it is, yes. But it's wrong pretty much as it's right. But this is one of the ingenious things about human memory. This is what makes it so good. You don't have to be entirely accurate all the time to be able to get by in the world and live a perfectly acceptable and, in fact, flourishing life. If you had to pay attention to every last detail, you wouldn't have enough space left in your brain to get through the day. You'd just be exhausted and fall asleep. So what you're doing constantly is you're taking cognitive shortcuts. You're bridging the gap so that you don't actually have to work out every last piece of information. Now, it's up to you whether you think that's cognitive laziness or genius. Personally, I think it's very clever, but yeah, that's your call on what you think about sort of humanity, I suppose. But the idea of being able to live a complete life with half the information is a balmy, sort of weird, and it sort of throws you off course because we think we know a lot, and that's an internal motivation to be right. Humans love to be right. It gives us that security, that safety net, that knowledge. And so we don't want to see things around us that contradict what we already think. And so there are various cognitive biases that you may be aware of that sort of lead us to only see what we already believe. Perhaps there'll be another video on the way about cognitive biases because they're particularly interesting. But sticking with the idea of memory at the moment, there are, I'd say, 3 ways that your memories could be unreliable, and 3 influences on memory that can shift them from the accurate to the incorrect but still convincing. So let's take a look at each in turn. We're going to start with what's called normative influence. So a normative influence on your memory is when you're taking societal norms or the group around you and you're taking what's right. And you've got to make a decision. Do you go with what you know to be right, or do you go with what everybody else is saying and doing in order to fit in? Because social exclusion is such a painful experience for a person that that motivation is enough to bring you over from here to here. Now, Solomon Asch gave us a really famous example of normative influence. This is a very black and white example. We'll run through it very quickly, but you'll be able to apply this to so many areas of real life where it's a little bit messier, a little bit muddier, and so you don't always get to see when you've been influenced. In this example, though, the which line is longest study, it's really clear. So, Asch gave his participants 3 lines. He had a short line, a medium line, and a long line. And he asked his participants, which line is the longest? Really simple. In private, all of his participants were able to get them right 100% of the time. They knew which line was the longest. It's a very easy perception task. However, he then put his participants into a group environment. Now, there were a number of people sitting down, but only one of those people was a participant. The rest were all actors, and they'd all been told to give the wrong answer every time. However, they'd all been told to give the same wrong answer. And that's where it was really interesting, because you had a person who was perfectly able to say, I know which one a long line is, I know which one a short line is. But then they can see that everybody else in the room, for some reason, disagrees with them. And what do? They start to change what they say. They don't change what they see. They change what they say they see. And so after a few repeats of this study, the person who's able to see which line's the longest starts to just agree with the rest of the group, because it's more comfortable to be in with the group but wrong than out of the group but right. And so very easy to see in Asch's study that transition. But in real life, it's sometimes quite difficult to tell when have you been influenced, to shift across to see things from the normative way, just because that's how everybody else is seeing it. So that's normative influence. Now moving on to informational influence. This is when you take somebody else who's perceived as being more knowledgeable than you in an area, and you say, well, they probably have more information than me about this. So maybe I didn't see it right. Maybe I'm not recalling it right. Maybe I didn't understand it right. So you're saying, are they more likely to have understood it correctly than you? And if you think yes, you take on board what they say without questioning it, because they are the expert. And so one I quite like about this is Sharif's study on the autokinetic effect. It wasn't looking at informational influence really, but you can use it to apply it to it. He asked his participants, dressed in his lab coat, looking very official, could you please estimate for me how far the white dot on this black background has moved? And his participants gave him estimations of how much it moved. 2 inches here, 1 inch there, 1.5 inches. It hadn't moved at all. It was the autokinetic effect, because your perception moves it. But your perception has been led by the idea that it was going to move. And so you've got all of these ideas. And again, it gets messier in day-to-day life, because you're not always aware of when that influence is coming to you. It's sometimes an expert on TV, it's sometimes a doctor, it's sometimes your parents, it's sometimes a teacher, it's sometimes just a complete random stranger who you happen to think knows more than you about a certain thing. Applying this to eyewitness testimonies, for example. If you were here and you saw something happen over there, and then you're talking to somebody who saw it from the other side, you think, well, they must have had a better view than me. They saw it better than I saw it, and so I'm going to take on what they saw. And then you're talking to someone else who was over there, and now they've given you a slightly different take, but they probably saw it better than you because there was a bus that went past at the time. So all of these things, and suddenly you've incorporated a bit of their story, a bit of their story, because the informational influence is such that you think they might have more information than you, so you build it into your episodic memory. Finally, and this is my favourite, memory distortion. This is when a person separate from you can feed you information after an event that changes your episodic memory. You can plant ideas. My favourite research in this area is done by Elizabeth Loftus, and it was a car accident paradigm. So she showed participants videos of a car accident, and then she asked them to free recall what they'd seen, and then she did a structured interview session. So free recall, write down everything you saw. Then in the interview, the interviewer asked, could you please estimate for me how fast was the car going when it hit the other car? But to other participants, they asked the question, how fast was the car going when it bumped the other car? And others got asked the question, how fast was the car going when it crashed into the other car? Now, just that change of verb loaded up that question with a perception of speed. And so, surprise, surprise, those who were asked the question, how fast was the car when it bumped the other car, gave a slower speed estimation than those who were asked, how fast was the car going when it crashed into the other car. So just because of that one word, it changed somebody's perception because they were their memory had become distorted by a leading question. What I found particularly interesting about this study is that they didn't just leave it there. The interviewer asked a question about smashed glass. Now, there was no smashed glass on the scene, and none of the participants in their free recall had mentioned smashed glass. But the interviewer mentioned smashed glass. 2 weeks later, when they came back and they did a re-interview about what they'd seen, a significant number of participants remembered smashed glass. Now, why was this? It wasn't because they'd seen it, but it was because it fitted in with their schema of what a car accident could include, and it was loaded in by somebody else after the event. It was dropped into their episodic memory. And as Elizabeth Loftus says, this new information invades us like a Trojan horse precisely because we do not detect its influence. We think, we're very trusting people, we think that everything around us is there to help us. We think that all information is there to benefit us. And if it fits into the general feeling of what we already think, then we just pop it in. We don't challenge it because we think it's there to benefit us and to help us develop our knowledge or experience. So those three areas of how your memories can be invaded, changed, distorted, disfigured suggest a few ways as to how your memories might become unreliable whilst you still think that they are pretty good. So finally, we're going to move on now to the question of, is there anything that we can do to make our memories better?